What is up, Baton Rouge? Welcome back to the Tiger Pride podcast presented by 225 Magazine. I'm Mark Clements here as always with Garrett Roser of TigerDetails.com. What a big week for LSU, man. From what we were talking about a week ago at this point last week and all the negative news that was coming out from, the Bama game and Eric Gilbert opting out and potentially transferring at some point to signing day on the horizon. We didn't know how that was going to shape up. Fast forward 1 week, LSU has a 37-34 win over Florida, maybe the biggest upset of the college football season this year. And they put together what is so far the number 3 recruiting class in the country. That happened yesterday. You were bouncing all around everywhere across the South Louisiana. And we're going to get into all that. I was going to start with the Florida game since that was kind of the, I guess, older news, but still a very exciting game. 37-34. A lot of people that I've talked to since then have said something to the effect of this was bound to happen at some point, not necessarily the Florida game, but there's just enough talent on LSU's team that at some point one of these games was going to go in their favor. They were going to make enough plays to win a football game, and then this one happened to be Florida. To me, I just never saw this coming. They were a 20-whatever point underdog. We mentioned all the negativity from last week. All the optics are kind of going against LSU's direction entering the game. And you're thinking, you got Trask. We didn't know Pitts wasn't going to play until right before kickoff. You have the Heisman frontrunner coming in. This defense hasn't stopped anybody. And yet somehow LSU pulls off the 34-point win. What was kind of going through your mind as this game unfolds and slowly and steadily as the game gets deeper and deeper, LSU kind of holding on to a lead, maybe bouncing back here and there. And then, what point did you think they could maybe pull this off or, this improbable upset?
So it was definitely a lot of fun because the expectations were so low. So it was all just kind of playing with house money, which I think made it a lot of fun to watch compared to a lot of the games thus far this season. And probably wasn't necessarily a bad dynamic for these young kids to be working with either to ultimately pull it off. And so some things happened early, obviously, where I think that touchdown pass from Max to Jure was such a pretty play and such an encouraging drive to happen to answer that early Florida score and not let things spiral to a point like they did against Alabama where you're down 21-0 in a hurry. And so I thought that was a positive. And then next thing you know, Eli pick 6 and taunts Trask and all that. And LSU is leading in the swamp. And
that was kind of swaggy. He's back in the end zone.
So there were some early points where you realize that it could be a little bit more interesting of a day than Florida was really bargaining for, and that it was going to probably be a fun, at least bulk of the game because LSU was out there making points and Florida, as importantly as anything, was making some mistakes to let LSU capitalize on. I think the touchdown to Kayshawn right before the half was a really pivotal point where Florida had just gone up right before the half and was going to have an opportunity to potentially go into the locker room up after a half that they hadn't played very well and then come back out and pull away against a young team. To me, the talent was always there for LSU, but they were so young and they were so short-handed in terms of numbers. And so those were two things that really concerned me in this game more than a lack of talent level, because I certainly think they have top-end talent to play with Florida. But to see the way that they in that second half kept coming, kept making plays, it was impressive with pretty much any turn where they were able to have that answer anytime Florida actually did something.
That was the biggest thing to me, is what you touched on, is them answering just about every challenge that kind of hit them that game. And you mentioned the numbers being shorthand. I mean, at some point, Stingley didn't play this game. Was it Flott gets tossed, and then Ricks is injured for a hot minute. And so you've got your top 3 cornerbacks all out of the game on one of those early drives. And at that point, you're thinking, like, this is going to get ugly real quick, especially if Ricks is out for any extended period of time in this game. Luckily, he wasn't. But you mentioned just kind of the plays they made in big spots and answering the call, and to stop them on fourth down. It almost felt like exactly like things were going to unfold the way they have all season. Florida's 4th and goal at the 3. LSU jumps offside and they, move them to the 1. And now they're going to, instead of kicking the field goal, they're going to go for it. And you're thinking they're about to punch this in, take 7 when it should have been 3, which would have been a nice little stop on the first drive. And then LSU stops them. And then a couple drives later, Florida scores. And then LSU answers with the 11-play, 75-yard drive with that pass to Jenkins that you talked about. And just every time that Florida did something, LSU answered with the touchdown drive of their own to open the second half. Florida has back-to-back touchdown drives. And then a couple drives later, LSU string together a 9-play, 84-yard touchdown drive. And it was just, a lot of the credit goes to Max Johnson in the offense for sticking with it. And I thought he had a really, really good game. And then, of course, let's talk about the the series, I guess, of plays at the end. Florida gets a stop. And then, as we all know now, Marco Wilson launches Kole Taylor. There you go. There he is. Player of the game for LSU right there is the shoe. Launches the shoe 20 yards downfield, which is also one of the funniest referee calls I've heard in a minute. Gives LSU a chance to set up. What was that?
So the referee call was hysterical. O's answering of questions about it afterward.
Yeah.
Just with that in his voice saying, I don't think I've ever seen a shoe thrown in a football game before. And then Max Johnson asked about the play, makes it sound like that's kind of the way they drew it up. Like it was time for someone to make a big play, and Kole Taylor's shoe and Marco Wilson came through in the clutch. It was really funny the way he delivered that for folks that haven't seen that video yet.
I love how I was looking up some Kole Taylor's bio on LSU Sports just now, and they've already updated his header photo to be that play as he's being tackled, and you can see Marco Wilson kind of grabbing his foot again, already on the LSU website. So they're quick with the subtle jabs there.
And I'm sure someone prior to me had already thought this through, but it clicked for me Monday, and I texted Cole and said, "Hey man, just reaching out. Congrats on a big win. If you have not set that shoe aside and preserved it, I would go ahead and do that, whether you want it as a keepsake or you want to auction it for some cause or something at some point. Just make sure that you have that shoe set aside and know which one it is and everything."
Did he?
I don't know, man.
I don't know if he answered saying he had that thing in a lockbox ready to go.
I feel like they probably took care of that pretty quickly. They're pretty on top of that stuff usually.
How far do you think you could launch a shoe? If you just took that shoe off right there, you're holding. You think you can go 20 yards? Not a bad toss by Marco. Yeah,
I think I could go 20. Could
you drill a school record 57-yarder?
Absolutely not. Neither could you.
Neither could I. Neither could I. Out of all the jokes I've made about me, put me in coach for the field goals, I could not have drilled a 57-yarder in the fog with the lights glaring. But man, what a kick that was! Then he runs on the field, gator chomping.
Another great soundbite where he says he does not think about missing kicks. He just thinks about what's going to happen when he makes it. And going into that kick, he was just thinking about gator chomping down the field, and so he got to do that so good.
I like how he was saying, asked the media if it was down the middle because he couldn't really even see it. That whole post-game interview was a good one. Just how much I put on here, how much does LSU need this? I don't know if need is necessarily the right word, but just the direction this season was going to be able to pull off the biggest win of their year, obviously, and one of the biggest upsets of the college football season overall, to beat one of your, this rivalry has gotten heated more and more over the past couple of years. Florida's knocking on the door of the playoff. To be able to not only get this win for yourself, but to, hurt a rival in the process, is how big was this for LSU's season? And I guess just sort of calm the fan base down, at least temporarily, who had their pitchforks out, prior to this kind of game. How big was this for LSU?
It was huge. I don't think it is overstating it to call it necessary, because I think for us, we look at the amount of big games with kind of big implications LSU has played in terms of what can be accomplished with a win. And there wasn't a lot of that in terms of what this could mean for where LSU gets placed in a bowl or anything like that, obviously. But because of the amount of negativity swirling, and there was a lot of talk and concern with the Eric Gilbert news earlier in the week that there could be some other players considering making a move elsewhere, and the fan base was certainly frustrated. The media was critical, and I don't think unfairly so. There's a lot going on that to write about, and it was days before signing day, and so at this really pivotal juncture for this program, everything was kind of spiraling negative, and they just needed something to stop that momentum and to have something positive to talk to its current players about, and the excitement that, you know, this could be the start of building toward that championship team that O talks about building again, and to sell to we'll get more into it, but to the prospects and their families to end up having a really strong recruiting week as well. I thought it was big on kind of the flip side of what we're used to in terms of, rather than what do you gain by winning this game, it was what negativity do you stop by not losing, and particularly on a big stage against another program like Florida that you compete against recruits for in some situations.
Now that on the field defensively, as good as they made plays when they had to, they made that stop on 4th and 1. They had a pick six. That Jay Ward interception was an awesome play for him to bounce off the helmet of did it bounce off of McLaughlin's helmet?
McLaughlin, yeah. I have watched that play so many times and have still not convinced myself how that was in bounds, but I'm not a referee.
Close. Dude, McLaughlin had a pretty good game too, coming off the bench in a spot that he probably didn't think he was going to be playing a ton. He had a good game, but the defense overall still, I mean, he gave up 600 plus yards. It could have been a lot more if some of these things don't fall their way. But I was really impressed with the offense. I thought Max Johnson threw the ball well, ran the ball well. He looked comfortable. We saw Chris Curry for kind of the first time all season. And the receivers, as many times as we talked about this year, they lost Jets, obviously, to the draft, and Jamar opts out, Terrace opts out, Gilbert's gone, Racey's injured, and you still have guys step up. Butte had another big game. Jeray Jenkins with a touchdown. We saw a few things from Coy Moore starting to get Trey Palmer involved, and obviously Kole Taylor with one of the biggest plays of the day on the little tight end out, whatever that was. But I thought the offense played really, really well, and that was encouraging because that side of the ball, you just kind of thought there was just numerically they were down so many guys. We've seen trouble with the O-line all season, and just for them to come out and be able to put up 37 and look pretty comfortable doing it was impressive. I'm curious your thoughts on Max and just how the offense flowed a little differently with him under center as opposed to Finley.
Yeah, they looked good. They were able to sustain some drives. I mean, a couple of the drives we mentioned, the Jeray Jenkins touchdown drive that they needed to answer early was an 11-play, 75-yard drive that Max did a good job with. The Kayshon Butte was a 9-play, 75, 9-play, 84 that ended with that Trey Bradford touchdown in the fourth quarter to put them back ahead 34-31. And so, I mean, he completed, I think, upper 50s, close to 60% of his passes, and they were able to kind of string some things together. He looked poised in the pocket, I thought, and that was one of the things that I really loved about the Jeray Jenkins touchdown pass was the way he kind of navigated around the pocket and then had the touch in that situation to put it right over the defender. And so I think a lot to be encouraged about in terms of just the way he handled himself and the way the offense operated around him.
Looks like no matter what direction they go in at quarterback, they got two guys that'll be competing for a starting job down the line because they've both looked really good in their spots this year. And you got to assume Max will start again this week after getting this win. So obviously Finley had a great first game. Second game didn't go so hot. So, it won't be the Auburn level of defense that Finley had in game 2 against Johnson. But still, things are always tough for your second go around. Guys have a little more film on you, that kind of thing.
And that's part of being a young player too, is just
Mhm.
some of the ups and downs that you need to iron out. And so for both these guys, they've shown some of the flashes they've shown is a lot to build on as they move forward and get older and more mature and experienced and iron some things out and have some more answers for some situations that they're currently going through for the first time, and eventually will be somewhat old hat for them.
Yeah. And so let's close out Florida, do a quick touch on Ole Miss, and then I want to get into signing day stuff, and that's all pretty fresh. But let's go with players of the week. I'll let you start offensively, and take whoever you would like.
Yeah, I mean, I think I I've got to go Max, I guess, with the first pick. I really like Kayshawn and wanted to go his way, but Max Johnson, freshman quarterback in the swamp, gets a 37-34 win, everything that we just talked about, and ends up being an SEC offensive player of the week. I think what a first start for him in that moment with, as we mentioned, not a ton on the line in terms of where they're going to position themselves in the national rankings, but a really big game for him to go out there and win under all of the circumstances at play.
Yeah, Max is a good call. I'm gonna pick Greg Stringfellow. Coach Coach O made the joke that he loosened the shoelaces a little bit before that last play. No, but yeah, I was gonna take Butte if you didn't. This is 2 games in a row. He's really started to step up, especially when, like we keep mentioning, some of these guys, the receivers, that they're just losing numbers. He's got an exciting future. I'm ready to watch him some more. I think he could really, one more off season of, getting into the rhythm with the offense and beefing up his body a little bit more. I think he's going to be a real threat next year. And I guess if we can't do, this is all saying that we can't do Cade York as offensive because I guess he's technically special teams, but huge day for Cade. And then
Yeah, no
defensively,
doubt.
there was 2 guys that stood out to me really. But I'll take Elias Ricks, obviously with the pick 6, and then I think he was just kind of everywhere defensively on some of these receivers, clearing balls away, especially after coming back from his little injury. And he's just been a playmaker all season as a guy. You thought a lot of the talk in the offseason when he signed, obviously a 5-star, but people had said he's a little small, needs to put on some weight, just get a little bit bigger. But he's been um, steady Eddie out there at cornerback. So another big day for him.
Man, I think there's a lot of guys potentially worth mentioning. I will, some guys like Jabril Cox and Jacoby Stevens and Damone Clark that are more veterans we're used to talking about. I thought Damone had a really big bounce back game after what has been kind of a rough season for him. Jacoby, we've talked about whether on this show or separately that it's been kind of a rough go for a guy that came back to be the leader and really improve his draft stock and to be in the middle of that defense. I don't know how many favors it's done him at times, but he was a big part of that early goal line stop, and he came up with some big plays. Jabril Cox looked really good in coverage. I mean, there were a couple plays that he looked like he was a cornerback out there playing somebody deep. But I'll give a shout out to another freshman, Jaquelin Roy, who comes up with his first 2 sacks of his career, and I think played a really big role up front and helping make Kyle Trask and company a little bit uncomfortable and helping set the table for some of the other things that happen.
Bro, he's a beast. He's true freshman, and you add him to what LSU signed yesterday, and it's got an exciting future on the D line. Also wanted to shout out Jay Ward because I feel like every play 5 was somewhere. I mean, obviously the interception was a big play, but he seemed like he was in on so many plays. So real quick, moving on to Ole Miss, they're 4-4 on the season. Your boy Lane Kiffin takes over. They've got wins over Vandy, Kentucky, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and they're currently on a 3-game win streak. Losses to Florida, Bama, Arkansas, and Auburn. Obviously, Kiffin and Coach O are pretty close, have a history together. Kiffin's going to be one of these innovative minds. So, as good as the LSU game was last week and fun to win a big game, the offense they could put together, Matt Corral under center, and some of the creativity that Kiffin can do against a defense that's struggled against a lot of different quarterbacks. This one still has me a little bit worried. I know it's Ole Miss, and it's hard to be kind of worried about a game like that typically when you're LSU. But um, how do you see this one shaping up? And do you think feel Kiffin's going to put together an offensive game plan that's going to give LSU some problems on Saturday?
Probably so. I mean, I've mentioned it on Sunday. When was going to be the appropriate time to reference the fact that LSU still gave up 19 quote unquote big plays to Florida's offense in that
Was it 19?
it was 19, 15 they had almost 400 yards on 15 of their passing plays. And so a lot of those issues were still there. But as I mentioned, Florida turned the ball over a few times, and that really hurt them and helped a young LSU team have some opportunities to make some splash plays, get some excitement going, get the ball back to the offense. And so I think that's going to be another big thing to watch. We've seen LSU's ability to answer in some big spots, even with so many of those veterans now gone from the team. And so that's encouraging. But is it going to be a shootout? Are they going to have to match Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss squad into the 40s or 50s or beyond? I mean, one of the early season exciting games was Alabama and Ole Miss suddenly very quickly overtaking that historic Mississippi State passing performance against LSU, because those two teams were just going back and forth nonstop. So does it become that sort of game? And are Max Johnson and company able to match that? Can LSU's defense come up with some more stops than what we've seen? They had a couple in really timely situations this past week, whether on the goal line early or with some of those turnovers. Can they get those and get that done? Because I could see this going any number of ways, certainly.
I've been wrong about just about everything in this college football season, so I don't ask me because I don't know. It seems like Ole Miss is averaging damn near 40 points a game. It seems like we're lining up for, I don't know if shootout's the right word. I don't know if LSU can put together enough offensive firepower to put up 40 points a game with all the. I know as good of a game as Johnson had and all these young receivers had, that's still a lot to ask. But that being said, Ole Miss is also giving up just about 40 points a game. So it seems like this is lined up to be a shootout with two not great defenses, two offenses that have some home run threats, some big plays in them. So I mean, I think you're right. Just saying, can LSU's defense get stops when it matters, and then can the offense keep making plays with some of these young guys stepping up? The spread currently is, let's see. So this is weird. The predictor has LSU at 62%, but the spread has now moved to Ole Miss minus 2.5. So it looks like this is somewhat of a coin flip almost. How would you take this one?
I don't know, man. I'm probably if I have to pick one of these teams to win this game, I'm probably just staying away from it altogether.
It does feel like about a field goal difference to me. Like if I'm I'm still as of now don't know who I'm gonna pick, but it'll probably be within 3 to less than a touchdown. 3 to 7 points.
Yeah, look. I came into this week planning to say whatever I needed to say, mea culpa, eat crow, whatever. I said that the outlook at Florida was bleak and was really impressed by what that team showed, kind of backed against the wall. And I think as long as they have handled that appropriately and not gotten too excited about that victory, knowing that there is still another game to be played this week, I think that this LSU team is certainly capable of adding another one. This Ole Miss team is not as good as Florida from a just level of being a complete team standpoint. And so if you can have a couple of things go similarly again at home as what you had go your way on the road, I think LSU can certainly win and get back even. And I think that would be a really big, just a big, I don't want to say moral victory, but to finish this season 5-5 against an all SEC record, despite everything that's happened, and avoid becoming the first reigning national champion to suffer a losing season since 1943, I think would be nice to just draw back even and be really big moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. And I think it feels like that last week was not only a stepping stone, but maybe some confidence booster for just the LSU players in general who have struggled a lot this year. And when you keep losing and you keep losing these, giving up a ton of points and offense struggles at times, it just a lot of that gets kind of demoralizing, gets the morale down. So I'm gonna say LSU does keep the momentum going in this season on a high note. Take this awesome recruiting class into next season with a lot of these young talents who are on the field this year, and start to feel pretty good about what they can put together the next year or two. So I'll say this one ends 38-35 LSU.
Yeah, I mean, same sort of ballpark as the Florida game. I think we maybe see some even more points than that, and I'll take LSU to win also though, and say 44 to 30, 44 to 40. Give me 44-40.
All right, I like it. And we touched on this recruiting class a couple times, and this has all been fresh. We're recording this Thursday morning before it comes out. Signing day was yesterday.
I still haven't recovered.
Yeah, I know, I can tell. And that's one of the days that you're bouncing around everywhere, as busy as you are all the time. Yesterday is kind of especially as you told me before, like Woj on draft day. So this LSU recruiting class,
I don't want to claim that. That's what Madeline Adams said yesterday. Yeah. I'm not in any way putting myself in a Woj category.
If instead of a Woj bomb, can it be a Rose bomb, something like that?
That was something that was mentioned at when I pulled up to LCA for Sage's thing yesterday. Was Rose bombs.
Sage Ryan, one of the biggest, if not the, I guess Mason Smith is kind of the marquee guy of this class. So let's start with Mason, because that was one that I think a lot of people felt confident LSU was going to end up grabbing him, but we've seen in the past some of these dudes that come down to the wire don't end up at LSU, and it hurts even more when it's a guy who's in your state, a guy who's from South Louisiana, where your head coach is from, a guy who's on the D line, which your head coach is a D line coach. So it seems like this was LSU. Not that they couldn't lose this guy. We don't know how any of this is going to turn out in college, but it was a big just for perception and obviously a position of need also for LSU. How big of a player is Mason coming in? Is the number one overall player according to Rivals on TigerDetails.com, and kind of the headliner of this class? How big was it for LSU to grab him, and what kind of player are they getting?
Yeah, he is a big player.
Literally.
But everything you mentioned, he's a guy that was ultimately kind of tailor-made for O to go get. And so that's someone that you want to make sure to keep in state when you have a big defensive lineman down the bayou where your coach is from and at the positions that he coached. And so you get a 6'6", 330-pound playmaker on the defensive front who works his tail off, and for all of the potential that he showed early, he continued to just kind of fine-tune his craft and build on his game the last few years. And I think adding him into a mix where you have Jaquelin Roy playing the way that he's playing as a freshman, you have Jacobian Guillory and Eric Taylor and some of those guys also from last year's class, or guys who have the opportunity to come back in these years to come. I think Mason is obviously the highest rated player in the country in this class because he's the highest rated player in the country for us at Rivals. But it's just a really nice centerpiece for that class from a keeping a big player home standpoint when Georgia and Alabama and company are pushing, as well as what he can eat when you put him into the middle of that defensive front.
Is he a guy that you think is going to be pushing for playing time, starting spot, first year on campus? He's that big of an impact kind of guy?
Yeah, I mean that's the plan. That's something they've talked about is him to get in there and compete for a spot, similarly to what we saw. I think we'll probably hear some things as we heard with O early on this year with Jaquella and company, of certainly nothing given, nothing taken for granted. And it may take some time for him to really kind of hit his stride, but I think he's going to be a name that you hear early.
He also seems like one of those, like, for example, when Tyler Shelvin committed, everyone knew he kind of had to get his body right. Mason seemed like he's got pretty trim, well-built kind of guy that looks like he's, ready for the college kind of game. So that's also good to see. Other big headliner was a guy you just mentioned, Sage Ryan, DB/safety, I guess, from Lafayette. Do you have a safety comparison in your head of a guy who maybe has come through LSU that you think he plays similar to back there?
I think the first thing that jumps out to me is he and I have talked a few times throughout his high school career of somewhat of a Tyrann Mathieu dynamic. They're definitely not the same player in terms of, there's just, Sage is 5'11". They run a little bit differently. But Sage can fly still. But just the playmaking ability, Sage is a guy that I first saw and took notice of as a freshman in the state championship game for LCA, where he caught my attention as much as any other player on the field as a ninth grade kid. And he was making plays on defense. He was making catches on offense. He was making big returns and stops on special teams. And he's just continued to build on that, where he does those sort of things. His awareness and vision and ball skills are tremendous, and he's tough as hell. And he's always going to go out there and work. He, as talented and highly rated as he could very well be the most humble kid I've ever talked to, just in the way he plays all of that off. I say plays it off. It just doesn't register to him that way. He's just on the eve of him making his commitment to LSU over Bama, and all of the eyes in Southeast recruiting were on him. And I show up and ask him what the week's been like with his phone blowing up and everything. He very ho-hum said, "Man, I'm just little Sage Ryan from Lafayette. Like, I don't understand like why they're all so worried about like where I want to go play college ball." And it's a very real dynamic that I think is a good place to be for the mentality of a kid that's that talented.
So those two are kind of the biggest, biggest fish that LSU signed. I thought they had a really good class in terms of skill position players. To get obviously Chris Hilton from Zachary, who's super talented. Excited to see him getting purple and gold. They flipped Malik Neighbors, another Lafayette guy, and then also signed Deion Smith from Jackson, Mississippi. And then the two running backs, Corey Kiner from Cincinnati, who was Mr. Ohio in football, and Amani Goodwin, who was also a late flip. I thought all five of those guys are, I know everyone wants to talk about the O-line and kind of shoring up some of the spots that seem to be struggles right now for LSU, but it is good to see them replenish the talent, especially when, like we mentioned all year, some of these guys LSU's losing, and then you kind of combine those with the 5-star and 4-star receivers, running backs LSU's already got on campus that are pretty young. It looks like the skill spots are going to be pretty set for the next few years when you just have a lot of these numbers, just the guys who are 4 and 5 stars kind of everywhere. Any of those guys stand out in particular to you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the day was good as a whole. They end up with 19 guys coming out of the Wednesday opening of the early signing period, and they lost 2 guys that I think are going to be really good players and looked like they were going to be really big pieces of this class. And JoJo Earl, the wide receiver from Texas, who goes to Bama, and Keanu Coate, the pass rusher from Florida, who ends up at Bama. But I thought that they've pivoted well from that. They end up with a great class overall at this point, because
Right.
they need to address the offensive line in a big way in February. But a lot of their top targets at that position group aren't making decisions until the spring. So with what they were hoping for from the early signing period, I think they did a great job. And all those names you mentioned, and one that gets really overlooked in this class, I think, on the other side is Matt Langway. He's kind of the the under the radar guy. If I have to take one name that doesn't get talked about enough that I think is going to excel early, and I think he and Sage Ryan are both going to play really early in that secondary. On offense, man, O compares Corey Kiner quite a bit to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which I think is really high praise and exciting for LSU fans. And he compared Deion Smith to Justin Jefferson last night. And so as much as I'm used to talking about Malik and Chris Hilton and all those guys, a couple of those out-of-state guys are really encouraging as well. I mean, I think they're all very talented players. And for this team to be ranked number 3 right now nationally, despite everything that's happened to this point, is really impressive. And I think there's several guys that are not ranked as highly as we'll look back in retrospect and realize they probably should have been.
I've heard a lot of people, and you've mentioned him a few times, but Matt Langlois being kind of an under the radar, people aren't really talking about him. But when you go watch his highlight reel, he's just like, some of the plays he's making are just spectacular. I'm curious, do you have a comparison for him or what he's going to bring early on to LSU? And you see him, I guess, playing safety as a DB?
Yeah, I think he can probably play anywhere in that secondary if they wanted him to, but he is a kid that is, I guess, somewhat similar to when I said Sage makes plays all over the field. Matt is everywhere for Catholic Point Competes, a small school that he plays all 3 phases in and is able to be really impressive, whether he's in coverage on defense or up in the box, because he is very physical for a guy that you're talking about as a small school, probably next level DB. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he's a lot of fun to watch, really exciting. And so he's got good ball skills. He makes things happen. He's as athletic as anyone in this class potentially. I mean, he's going to be one of the most athletic kids that pops off. He's fast. I don't remember his 40 time, but he's got really good track speed and is up to 6 foot 185 and really likes to use it. He likes to hit people, man. And it's a lot of fun.
And then another big just position that's always highlighted is quarterback, and they signed Garrett Nutsmeyer, the 6th rated quarterback on Rivals. What kind of guy is he? Pro style? And obviously LSU's got 2 freshman quarterbacks. So it looks like when you add him into the mix, they've got that position that's at least a lot of optimism and a lot of ambitious. You got some guys in there.
Yeah, 6'2", 185 kid that was impressive as a youngster, starting to come to some LSU camps a couple years ago, and has just continued to improve his game. He's made some throws at back when things were normal, I guess, last summer, watching him at camp going into his junior year. He really opened a lot of eyes as to the type of player he was becoming, and then went out there and had a fantastic season for his high school team in Texas this year. It's a lot of fun to watch him throw the football all over the field. But also I really enjoy when he's able to kind of extend some things a little bit. He's a really impressive young leader, both on the field and the way he carries himself and has the team around him play with him and for him. And I think that's worked really well with him being a leader in this recruiting class too. He was a part of getting a lot of those guys to Baton Rouge before the season. And when things get a little crazy on the football field, he's able to get away from some pressure, extend some things, and make some of those pretty throws on the run. And when things got a little crazy with this recruiting class, he was able to kind of be an extension of O and the staff in terms of selling some of these guys on the idea that there were some really big things ahead and just kind of hop on board. Let's go make something special in Baton Rouge, sort of thing.
Speaking of that, and you mentioned the O-line earlier, they've only signed so far one true offensive lineman and Garrett Dellinger from Michigan. But I know Mason yesterday mentioned trying to recruit his buddy Tristan Lee, who's a 5-star tackle from Fairfax, Virginia. I guess kind of a 2-part question. Do you think, is LSU going kind of like all in right now on Lee, trying to get him on board? And then do you see any other O linemen that are kind of on their radar that they could be trying to get committed down the stretch into February?
Yeah, so they coming out of yesterday with 19, they still have 6 spots to fill, and I think you're looking at about half of those going to O-line, 3 or 4 of those spots they're anticipating going to O-line, and I think 1 or 2 of those will be older transfer type players. I know they have some grad transfers that they are engaged with and could potentially see ending up in Baton Rouge, just depending on how some things fall into place. They have some pretty high quality offensive line targets beyond Tristan Lee as well. Kimo Makanioli and Jordan Moko are kind of probably the first 2 names that we hear discussed very much. I think Tristan is kind of the leader of that pack, but they have identified, certainly some contingency plans because they want several. And unless you hit on your first 3 or 4 guys, I think they're in good position with a few others as well. And so that's kind of where this entire class now hinges to me is, can they get the help up front? And I think Tristan would answer that question as aggressively as any one of those guys could, to have that quality of a high school prospect that you'll have for a few years down the road.
And then just lastly, we'll close it out with just any thoughts on, you just kind of touched on it there a little bit, saying probably half the spots go into O linemen, but any outlook on how LSU hopes to finish out this class? And is there a ceiling for how high they could get in terms of just rankings in the country? Could they hit that top spot, or is that probably going to be Bama's and they can maybe get number 2? Any thoughts in that regard? Not that it truly matters, but
yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the class rankings and how the math could work out. Right. Tristan would be huge in that regard, though. He's a very highly rated kid and is a major target that LSU is in a good position with. They have continued to battle Oklahoma and Florida late with him, and I know they made an early impact on him and have really never gone away in his recruitment. Have always been he's always been a very big priority for this staff and this class. And so you look at 3 or 4 of those 6 spots going to offensive line. There's some other notable defensive front guys to keep an eye on. Savion Jones, the edge rusher from St. James that has been committed for a while. Sounds like he is still on pace to be a part of the class, just was holding off until February to make a signing. I know there's Bryce Langston that Florida and LSU have kind of continued to battle for, that we may see something on at some point. He would be a huge get for this class if they could pull him away from the Gators. I thought Logan Diggs, the running back, or if they necessarily needed him to, he's another guy that I think, similar to Devin White, could transition, or Pat Queen for that matter, could transition to a linebacker down the road. The Rummel running back that did not sign with Notre Dame on Wednesday after being committed to them for a while and said he wanted to hold off till February. I think that potentially bodes well for LSU if there's space for him. And then everyone's still kind of waiting to see what happens with Kari G, who was a commit and not sure if he ends up in the class or not, but is still out there, not signed. And Rajon Davis, a linebacker that has been committed for a long time, that they seem to lose a little bit of ground with late, but is not signing until the spring. And so we'll see how it plays out down the stretch.
Good news is LSU's in a pretty good spot as of this point, number 3 class in the country, and looks like they could only finish adding a few more guys to improve the strength of this class. But no matter what happens, follow TigerDetails.com. Jarrett, Jimmy, Julie, Triple J's, the Rose Bombs. Give him a follow on Twitter at Jarrett Roser. I'm on Twitter at Mark Clements225. And of course, all the 225 magazine brands, Facebook.com/225 magazine, Instagram and Twitter at 225 Baton Rouge. And wherever you find your podcast, we should be there. Spotify, Apple Store, Google Play Store, and of course on YouTube. Got my Santa hat rocking early. We're only a week from today for Christmas Eve. I'll probably be wearing this hat next week too.
Know if I can lift my.
Oh, look at that. So you don't have a shoe on, so it's down the field 20 yards somewhere. Thank y'all for listening, and we'll see you next week.